in our worship. So our worship is totally evangelical and it's totally biblical. And of course, the gospel of God in Jesus is totally biblical. And the four gospels and St. Paul's gospel are interpretations of the law, the Psalms, and the prophets of the Old Testament. So therefore, Christian worship from the earliest time is exactly that. It's evangelical biblical worship. It's how people who believe in the Bible, so to speak, believe the Bible and the witness of the Bible, how they are called to worship. And this is extremely important because lots of folks don't realize that the divine liturgy is totally, completely biblical. It's evangelical and biblical. Now, you have to admit that the way some of us Orthodox explain it make that hard to see and hard to understand, especially when we get mystical and symbolical and give all symbolical meanings to various acts of the liturgy without even connecting them to their fundamental.
The ancient faith for the modern world. This is Ancient Faith Radio.
Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Louh, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. My name is Father Nicholas Louh, and I'm the parish priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church right here in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm so excited that you're joining us on this Tuesday, June 7th at 8 p.m. Live with the Louhs is a show that many of you already know, but if you're new to our family, you know that it's a show that marries both faith and psychology to kind of give you some practical tools to live by in your own walk of faith. So once again, thanks so much for taking the time to join us this evening. We broadcast our show every single Tuesday right here from Jacksonville from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. You know, before we dive into tonight's really, really important topic, we want to encourage you to stay connected to us by joining us on our social media platforms. Friends, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, all under the headings of The Louhs. And if you're looking for our sermons, they're also found on our YouTube channel, which again is The Louhs. It's spelled quite uniquely. It's Louhs. That's The Louhs. And if you're also looking for some daily words of inspiration, Roxanne and I began about a year and a half ago sending out daily inspirational messages. And we started that with the hope that just to kind of give you some encouragement all throughout the week. And so if you are interested, go to our website at thelouhs.com. That's Louhs.com. Click on that subscribe button. And all you have to do is simply put in your email address. And every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, you're going to receive just a word of encouragement. If you find it beneficial, do us a favor, share them with your friends and family. God knows we need to give some encouragement and share Christ's light with the world that's going through so much right now. So do us that favor if you are already receiving those messages. And as you all know, we published a book last year called Renewing You, a Priest, a Psychologist, and a Plan that basically takes 8 of the biggest topics that Roxanne and I see in our practice and in our parish and kind of address them head on from both a faith perspective and a psychology perspective. And it's just been, we're so pleased that it's been such a benefit to so many. But if you're looking for some renewal and maybe the way in which you think or your walk of faith, or as we're going to talk about tonight, our youth and how we take care of them, or your marriage, whatever, if any of those topics we cover extensively in our book. So definitely take a look at it. You can find it right here at Ancient Faith. Just go to store.ancientfaith.com. As always, we invite you to join the conversation tonight. You can call in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Or email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. So let's get started, friends. Tonight, we're dedicating our show to our youth. I truly believe this, and I've shown this on countless times on our show, that I think one of the greatest gifts that God gives us are our youth, our children. That in many ways, God gives us this gift, and Our gift back, if you will, or our thank you back to him is how we raise them and guide them in the ways of Christ. But we have to be totally honest with ourselves. We're living in a world right now where our youth, I would argue, are under attack. They're constantly living in a culture that's constantly telling them who they are, what they should be, and how they should live. Let me share with you some statistics. You have to know, first of all, that the group that we're talking about are people between the ages of 4 to 24. That's born from between 1995 and 2015. We're going to call them, what the world calls them, Generation Z. There are about 74 million people that fit into this category here in the States. This age group comprises 1 in 4 people, though, in the world today. And the statistics about what they're going through are quite alarming. We don't even have the time to cover every one of them, but just listen to this. They're spending around 4 hours a day on screens. They are more disconnected, isolated, and sadly, a lot of them are facing depression at levels that we have not seen with previous generations. We also see amongst many of them that close to 60% of them, according to the current statistics, that by the time that they get of the age, by the time they get to the age of 30, many of them will not be involved in a church. What's even more alarming is that 2 out of 3 of them may not even believe in who God is. And only 3% of this particular generation are actually reading their Bible, much less know what the Bible says. They're really under attack. So how do we fight for our youth and our young adults? How do we empower them as parents? How do we strengthen our church to meet the needs of what our youth are going through today? Here to speak with us about this topic is a very dear friend of ours, Dr. Ann Bezzerides. And let me just tell you a little bit about her. Ann is the director of Office of Vocation and Ministry at Hellenic College Holy Cross, where she teaches youth ministry and runs the Certificate in Youth and Young Adult Ministry and Leadership. A fantastic ministry, by the way. She's also the executive director of the Crossroads Institute, which runs both high school summer institute from its Holy Cross home base with expansion sessions in Chicago and San Francisco, and the Telos Project, which engages young adults in our parishes from the new Telos Center, a hub for young adults at St. Constantine and Helen in Central Square, Cambridge, and is also an editor and contributor to 2 volumes of collected essays that inform the ministry, Christ at Work, Orthodox Christian Perspectives of Vocation and Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and Higher Education. She's a graduate of Middlebury College. She's also a graduate and received her Master's of Divinity at St. Vladimir's Seminary. By the way, all priests have a Master's of Divinity, so her education is exactly that of what a priest is. And she also, though, has a PhD from Boston College. She and her husband, Vasilios, who's a pediatric cardiologist and researcher, have 3 wonderful boys and live in Brookline, Massachusetts. Dr. Ann, welcome to Live with the Louhs.
Father Nicholas, it is so good to be with you, and thank you for your gracious welcome.
Absolutely. I know that we've already got some people actually sending in email questions literally as I was giving this intro. So we're going to get to those in just a few moments. But we do want to once again remind our listeners that you can call in at 1-855-237-2346 or email us at ask@ancientfaith.com. We're just giving you an opportunity to speak and to talk about how and ways that we can empower and strengthen our youth and young adults in the world today. So, and just like as we're getting started, I think one of the questions that I think are on the hearts of all of us is really what the title of this show is how do you think that we can at least begin to fight for our youth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been thinking about this so much, for my life, but even since we thought about this podcast, and I think the first thing I will say is that I'm going to go with the language of fighting for our youth, but in general, I would say I gravitate more towards really grounding ourselves as we think about it in a vision for something much bigger than what the world usually offers them. So instead of even approaching the thing as a kind of holy war, rather approaching it as there is, as a former Crossroads director used to say, a stronger magnet than what the world is pulling them to, and that stronger magnet is Christ. And what is the bigger vision? What is the inspiring vision? What is the beautiful story that we can tell about why we're on this earth and what our mission is here? And so that's the first thing that I think of. And to say a little bit more about that, I'll just briefly share my story.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised in the Greek Orthodox Church here in the Boston area. In college, I studied writing, I studied English, and I was certified to teach English in Vermont public schools, high school English. And as I was doing my student teaching, I'd also had this background in working at our beautiful Metropolis summer camp. At that time, it was the Boston Diocese Camp, BDC.
Mm-hmm.
I'd gone with some friends to some Protestant camps, and I just really saw the difference between what I was the mission work that we were able to do at those camping programs and what I was unable to do so often in a public high school. And I actually think public high school teachers have an incredibly holy role. But it was just clear to me that I really wanted to do more for our young people. That led me to seminary. And while I was at seminary, the dean actually approached me, and the dean was our beloved Father Thomas Hopko of blessed memory, who I just heard his words just before we came on, and I miss him so much. But he said, okay, St. Vladimir's was been thinking about applying for this grant to start a high school summer institute. And it was like I'd been struck by electricity, because it was everything. When I got to St. Vladimir's, I thought, why didn't any of this amazing learning make it trickle down to when I was younger? Because I was so hungry for this, and I didn't know how to access it. And so when I was at St. Vladimir's, I started this little high school summer institute. Father Thomas gave me the blessing to go ahead and do it. And that ran for a few years, a little one. And then they encouraged me to go on, do doctoral work. I did that at St. Vladimir's. I did that at Boston College. And then one surprise after another, Holy Cross received a $2 million grant to do vocation work with high school youth and with college students. They wanted us to work on the topic of vocation with young people. And part of that was a high school institute all around the topic of vocation. And so in 2003, I was hired to run this grant. And in 2004, we ran the first session of what is the Crossroads Summer Institute. And so my first answer, the answer that's been sort of shaping most of my life, my adult life, has been that how Crossroad fights for our youth, or rather inspires, invites them, gives them a robust vision for the Orthodox life. And our anchoring piece is we have this, all of our young people have this cultural pressure of what to do. What do you want to be? What clothes do you wear? What social media do you follow? What games do you play? My sons at one point a few summers ago described to me they had to define themselves as kids who didn't play, Fortnite. They define themselves as kids who didn't play Fortnite.
Right.
What shows do you want? What interests do you have? And what we found so compelling to share with teenagers is to flip the what to the question of who. Who are you? Who are you? And that question can only be really unpacked by asking the question of who is Christ, and then who is. And so we take young people through this 3-part movement of this: who am I, who is Christ, and who is your neighbor? And it gives young people a chance away from their parents and home parishes to figure out if this Orthodox faith that they were raised in is something that they could see becoming part of their life after they leave home. It preaches the gospel to them. And I want to say just a little bit more here, because I love the history of Christian education. The history of Christian education here in the United States is to become aware of this tension, a tension between a concept of nurture and faith on the one hand, and the idea of charismatic proclamation of the faith on the other. One strand of educators believe that we should simply nurture children in faith and raise them in Christian communities. And in this context, children would become Christians. And another strand believes that almost the opposite, that children should be kept more or less in the dark about things of the faith so that in their adolescent years, they could become fully aware of their own sinfulness. And at this point, hear a dynamic proclamation of the gospel and have a full-fledged conversion experience. Well, as Orthodox Christians, we believe both. We baptize infants because we believe a Christian community can and should nurture faith. But on the other hand, some of the best preaching in the patristic era, teaching that is foundational for our theology, was geared toward converting reasoning adults. The saints' lives have stories of both. The child who from his youth has the call to ministry, for example, St. Athanasius, and the sinner who has a remarkable conversion experience as an adult. So Crossroad is really structured with both in mind, that teenagers are interested in Crossroad because most often their parish communities and families have nurtured them in their faith, provided remarkable examples and good teaching within the context of our beautiful liturgical life. This leads them to want more. But then we all need to hear the gospel as if we've never heard it before, to be struck by the weight of our own sin, of our world's sin, and the realization that Christ died for us, first among sinners, and rose in triumphant victory over death, offering us eternal life. My seminary professors convinced me that the function of every sermon is to preach the gospel in a fresh way, and Father Nicholas, you do this so well, in the way that the congregation needs to hear it for their particular time and place. We all have a part of our heart that's unconverted. And if this is critical for young adults, then it's even more so for teenagers who are making decisions that impact the rest of their lives. And so, in short, charismatic proclamation of the gospel is an essential way Crossroads fights for our youth. The staff know that it is the mission to inspire high school juniors and seniors that the way of Christ is the road of the cross, for it is in him we find direction, meaning, hope, love, and answers. We preach Christ crucified. Crossroads fights for Jesus' presence in our young people's lives amidst a very noisy world. It also feeds their minds. And I'm going to share a little bit more here because I think as I unpack what Crossroad does, it has a lot of implications for what the rest of us do in our regular parenting lives and our regular church lives. So Crossroad also feeds their minds.
And let me just give an opportunity for our listeners just to call in if they're just tuning in. We're speaking with Dr. Ann Bezzerides of Holy Cross Theological Seminary. She's speaking with us as we're talking tonight about how we fight for our youth. We invite you, if you have a question for Ann, to please call us or even a comment. We'd love to hear from you. 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. We're also broadcasting on our social media platforms. So if you're on Facebook under the Louhs, we are broadcasting our show there. And so you can definitely feel free to share some questions in the comments line. Ann, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Father Nick. So, this was so huge for me, and this is one of the reasons for Crossroad is we try to feed their minds. And actually, Father Tom Hopko of blessed memory came and taught at Crossroad till it was one of the very last things he dropped from his calendar because he felt it was so important. And so many adults today say they had their lives changed by hearing Father Tom when they were 16, and now we have some phenomenal faculty as well. But we ask them to bring their hardest questions, that doubt is not a challenge to faith, but rather indifference is. And we connect them with these brilliant faculty. We know that when you go to college, it's not just the social world that will challenge faith and virtue, that often the very classes themselves are structured to debunk faith and faith traditions. But the thing is, Orthodoxy is such a robust theological tradition, and we want to just let our young people know it can take your hardest questions. We can give you theological reflection and wisdom that will blow your mind. And we've heard these kids, it's so fun to see it happen, young, kind of macho guys go, this is blowing my mind, The other thing that is we connect to their hands, and this idea of head, heart, and hands. How will you love the neighbor, and how will you actually work that out in action? And finally, the peers. I can't tell you how many people wake up to the idea that they're not alone and having a heart for the deeper things of this world, the more transcendent things. They feel less alone in the world. They become friends for life. They've even married each other. They've baptized one another's children. It's so indescribably beautiful. It's just, we feel like we bear witness to a miracle almost every single time. We set the table and prepare the food, but the Lord himself is at the table. So I wanted to share that.
Yes.
And be happy to answer more questions. And then I'll go ahead.
Yeah, well, I wanted to kind of build on that, Ann. I think, one of the things, when I look out in the world today, and I love the fact that you shared your testimony or your story about, your what kind of lit that spark within the inside of you. You went to camp at the Boston Diocese camp. You obviously went to some Protestant camps, and I can totally relate to both of those in being very instrumental in my own life. But as I hear you, I can't help but think, okay, the students that we're getting at Crossroads, or the young people that are coming to Crossroads, there is what I love about the ministry, and you can find out more about it. And maybe you could share later on in the show, websites that they can go to find out more about it. But, for the average, we're looking at our churches today. We're seeing our youth, struggling so much with, they've come out of the COVID pandemic. They've been, just further enhancing their not only socially distanced, as the phrase that was coined when we were during this pandemic, but also in many ways spiritually distant. We're still we're seeing the need of communion in community being now seeing the effects of that, not having that community together, and more importantly, also seeing young people today that are finding that have access to so much information, so many distractions, and really asking themselves, I think, for many of them is really, how does my church impact me? So even before they even are interested in doing or inquiring about a Crossroad, is what would you say to parents that have an adolescent teen that they just go to church every Sunday? They've got to fight for them to be in church every single Sunday. What would you give as some guidance to say, okay, look, let me kind of give you some tools that you can be applying in your everyday to knowing what our youth are experiencing. What are some ways that you would recommend that they can do to kind of, keep their children engaged, not only in the church, but I would argue even more importantly which is done through the church, but have a connection with Christ, and having their faith be an active part of their day-to-day lives, as opposed to maybe just a Sunday morning experience.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I do, it's funny, I've said this before, I started Crossroad when I was 27, so I was closer to the kids' age, and then we had 3 children, and so now I've got 16, 13, and 11. I'm right in it, navigating all the things that other families are navigating: screen time, phone use, friendships, COVID, anxiety, and, also trying to help our students at Holy Cross figure out how do they navigate this when they go into community. So a couple things I think about, and they come out of actually the reading we do for youth ministry. I'd recommend to everybody a book called Hurt 2.0 by Chap Clark. And I think the most important is to first of all, get into the real world of young people. Well, actually, I should step back. The most important thing for us is to have Christ hold us together as right, and be able to actually speak to how that is happening, to be fed by His Word, to be fed by the Word as we enflesh it in liturgy, to be alive in our faith and how our faith holds us together, and be prepared to narrate that for our youth. I love what you're just sharing. I think that the idea of us being able to, when I was doing some youth ministry work after I left the seminary, they used to tell us that we should be able to, in doing youth ministry, we should encourage parents as well as the people that are doing youth ministry to be able to share their testimony in anywhere between a 2 to 4 minute
And they would actually teach us how to do that within 2 to 4 minutes. In other words, how are we connected to Christ? What speaks to us about being in the church? And that our story, much like how we see through the scriptures, the parables, are just as inspirational oftentimes as as someone hearing a sermon or even participating sometimes in the liturgy, because it gives it in a very real way where it's a tangible thing that they can hear. So I just wanted to kind of echo that with our listeners tonight, that being able to kind of share that your narrative, your story, your testimony in a way that our young people, your children know, and ask yourself, do your children know how powerful Christ is working in your life, and be able to articulate that?
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I think it's both the moments of, okay, this is where, of sort of a testimony moment when something huge happened. It's also little moments, and so it's almost this ongoing, and I'll get to this in a little bit, but, I was just thinking back to just a few months ago, I offered condolences, memory eternal, to an older adult in the parish who just lost her mother. And just standing there after getting on Diva in, sort of in the pew as we're all exiting, she just witnessed to me about what it was like processing her mother's death and how it was hard, but where God, held her together in that moment. And it's just so beautiful. Like, we all need to do it kind of all the time for young people, that they need it. And I think the point of the Hurt book, so number one, we ground ourselves in how we narrate our own story, and how we can share that with other people. And why that's so important is, as you dig into this book by Chap Clark, his key insight is that adolescents have been cut off for far too long from the adults who have the power and experience to help them transition into the greater society. His big thesis is adolescence has been abandoned by us.
Wow.
And that's cool, and it's hard, and I think it's true. I think it's so easy for us to get caught up in our own work, to watch a show that's more entertaining than having the presence with our young people, with fielding out how we love them to schools that we hope will do it in our stead, and how important it is for us to be present, to have Christ hold us together, and to share that with young people. And I think, so that's Chap Clark's insight. The other book we read that I would recommend to everybody is this book called Growing Young. And it's Fuller Youth Institute. They used a couple Orthodox parishes in the study, and I could say more about it, but in general, one of the things they learned is that they said, the old model of youth groups was that you'd make sure for every 5 to 7 youth, you'd have one advisor, one field trip chaperone. And they said the provocative thing, they said, what if we flipped that, like the parishes that care for young people so that their faith sticks for life, have rethought about that, and that instead of the 1-to-5 ratio in one direction, they flipped it and said, what if we thought for every adolescent in our parish, we're going to make sure they have 5 mentors in this community?
I love that.
Isn't it so good? And so just to your point, Father Nicholas, to focus on youth and how we can fight for him, we have to focus on mobilizing the people who make a huge difference in their lives. And just remind us, like, who are they? They are parents, and they're not. And the thing about it is, it's our own kids, but it's other people's kids too. I'll never forget, actually, after, we had our third baby, I was then cuddling a baby in church, and my kumbara walked by, and she looked at me and she said, other people's babies. And it was sort of this sweet confirmation that, when our babies are done, we get to hold other people's babies in church. And it's one of the things in the world. But that just is amplified. It's it's other people's children in church. And some of my favorite, like as I think about our parish context, some of the favorite images I have in my mind is my children sitting with adults that they thought were so cool, adults like our friends, who were just spending time with them, talking about physics or theater or, language,
It's one of the things that are so, I think that one of the things that we're trying to do here in Jacksonville and trying to, if we can get this right, maybe even share it, but on a much larger scale is that I think every church should have a mentoring ministry, a standardized mentoring ministry where you do a 5-to-1, where you have 5 adults working in the lives of one child. And I think in knowing knowing the Orthodox Church, it's the one of the pillars of our faith, I would argue, is the community. It's the we say in Greek the chorio, the village that helps to create. We say, even in the West, we say that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, yes, and we need to create such a ministry within the church that allows that to happen, so that the parents actually have an extended level of parents, not just the godparents, but other parents that are helping to speak life and shaping those the children. I want to just give just a real quick invitation to those of you that are listening to our show that you're more than welcome to call in and speak with Dr. Ann Bezzerides of Holy Cross Theological Seminary. We're talking about how do we fight for our youth, and it's a fascinating conversation, something that we obviously would not be able to finish doing in one show, but we just wanted to give an opportunity for you, the listeners, to have an opportunity to kind of just learn, listen, but also offer. So if you have a comment or just a question, call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. And you can also share comments on our Facebook page under the Louhs. It's also being broadcast on the Ancient Faith's Facebook page. So please feel free to share us with comments. I think, Ann, what I don't want parents as they're listening to this, because as you know, I'm the parent of, along with Roxanne, we co-parent of our 2 children. Parents are under so much pressure now, and the statistics on, how much time parents spend, a husband and a wife, I read recently, are only spending about 4 minutes a day in truly connected conversation. And I'm not talking about, hey, let's go take the children to piano lessons or to soccer practice. I'm simply just saying 4 minutes only of true engaged conversation. Some of the statistics that are out there recently find that the average cleanup time for a meal is only about 3 to 4 minutes. And the reason is because people are eating fast food or they're having microwave meals. There's no cleanup. It just, we hear a lot of the importance of the parents doing it. And we just want to tell you, as the parents that are listening here, we hear you. We totally understand that there's a lot of pressures, to be quite honest, on you. And I would argue that in many ways, Ann, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I really feel like we're under that this is a spiritual battle that we call this, these are like weapons of mass, we call them weapons of mass distraction. And there's distractions that the world is sharing with our youth, but there's also distractions that are for no doubt that are impacting our adults, are impacting our parents and our ability to parent our children, whether it be keeping up with what other kids are doing and being very competitive at sporting events, et cetera. So maybe just speak a little bit about, how as parents, how do we try to navigate this? Because it seems like some parent may be listening going, this is just another piece of the pie that I need to add to, that I'm trying to carry. And maybe just talk a little bit about how we can empower the parents to kind of also realize that this is a spiritual battle for them to also be aware of.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of what is a quick win and a tweak begin to make that is not going to feel overwhelming. That is you take one step at a time. Like look at weekly life and say, okay, or either weekly or daily, and just say, if there's one little spot where I could connect in a different way, if there's one small thing that I could change, and stick with that for a month, see what emerges in that time, and the possibilities are endless. The possibilities could be as simple as silence in the car, so that audio or earphones don't go on and there's an uncomfortable silence where children start talking.
Mm-hmm.
It could be 10 extra minutes at bedtime. I am amazed at how much comes out right before bed.
I know. Absolutely.
Right? It's just the window's open of talking. A lot comes out. So that is just such a precious time to be attentive. But if the list gets too long and if you're too hard on yourself, you won't make a small change. And that small change is what will, it's like snowball effect, I think.
Absolutely. I agree.
And I will just say, like, the thing I think is so important is this is where parishes and everybody else listening is we also need help, and we just need to wake up the village.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is where, most of us don't live with grandparents next door anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Grandparents have slowed down. I mean, it's almost like they were perfectly designed to be present for children. And when I collect my students in youth ministry share narratives, and also some people as part of our Tell Us project have shared narratives of who formed them in faith. And it is astonishing how often grandparents come up. And because they have time and the wisdom to know how to tell the stories. And I think that's just so important. So, and what, our grandparents can do it for our own children. What if we woke them up? What if all the grandparents at their own communities were just given permission and reminded that other people's children actually need them?
Mm-hmm.
And what does that look like? I know, some wonderful stories of people who stayed, going to church through college because a very cool grandma just picked them up. It was her mission to make sure she went to a particular campus, collected the young adults who wanted to go to church, and brought them to church. Like, that is a huge ministry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think all of those. I think. I love how you said that it's almost that the church, needs to be awakened, and I think that the soul of, how we say during, even in throughout the scriptures, it talks about the soul sometimes is sleeping, and I would say, St. Paul talks about this in terms of a spiritual battle that we're waging, that we need to be constantly alert. And I think that's true for the church. I think there, across the board, we're not just speaking about Orthodox Christianity, but across the board, as you know so well, Ann, is that we're seeing, I think there's 185 nations in the world, and there may be a little bit more. I remember reading a study about this recently, but that Christianity in this country is on the decline as far as active participation in church, prayer, reading of the Bibles, involvement in services, and so I think what's happening for a lot of our youth is, the church has to, when I say church, I'm referring to us as the people. We make up that church, is to realize that we have a stake in our youth, that we have a stake in making sure that this is not just babysitting, that what we do with youth ministry, we're not just simply activity coordinators. We are creating and shaping the souls of children. And as we know, through just physiologically speaking, the brains of children are not fully developed till they're actually in their mid-20s. So we are literally shaping the mind of God within every one of these children and their souls. And what we do during these precious adolescent years and early 20s is truly empowering and laying the foundation of the success of the church. I mean, and so for me, I think this is that not doing this becomes truly an existential threat to the life of the church if we are not doing that. Not just for youth, but through every demographics, but especially with our youth, because we're seeing that the numbers are going down. And if numbers are one way or one metric of looking at the health of something, then the numbers that we have here in our church across the board, talking about Christianity in general, are deeply alarming. And we do have this email question that just came in. I think it's something that I would love for you to address. The mother emails this question. She wants to remain anonymous, and so we are honoring that. She says this: my 16-year-old daughter has recently started to dress in very revealing clothing. When we discuss it, she said it was just about fashion, that her intentions are not to make women jealous and men full of lust, and that because of that, there's really nothing wrong with it. But I disagree. How do I help her understand the importance of modesty in an Orthodox Christian life?
Yeah, oh, that's good. my answer is going to be an interesting, it's a hard one, because I think this is where I'd say mentors are so important. The hardest is, there is this mother-teenage daughter tension that is natural, right? Trying to come towards independence. And I think often what you struggle with teenagers is they literally want to listen. They want to fight your wisdom. They want to fight it. And this is why I feel so strongly that young adults energized to be in anyone truly, but especially young adults to be energized in young people's lives, to be role models for them, to say things in ways that other people couldn't say, in a way that inspires young people is super important. So that's a hard answer if the community isn't structured that way, if you don't have a youth worker. I did when I was growing up, there was somebody in town, and she was just a devout Christian who would just say hard things to us, when we were teenagers. She wasn't our parent, and so we listened. And sometimes you want to fight, and there's a lot more with that relationship. That all said, I think young people do listen to us, even if they want to rebel against it. I would say continue to put down, maybe write up for yourself what is most compelling to you about why dressing modestly, dressing in a way that, becomes us and doesn't, I could say a million things about it, but is beautiful. I mean, it's hard. It all sort of depends so much on what the young person believes about God, and so you want to be careful, because you want to respect their own choice of whether or not at this point they believe that there's a God, and what his plan what his vision for their life and the way they steward their bodies would be. So I'm sure your dear wife would have even more wise things to say about this. But I think, the other thing I'll say is that another, just a thought would be the power of written thoughts to a teen, that it almost takes away the pressure of a conversation and a young person's instinct to be defensive. So a letter to her about a vision, maybe with some other reading you find, and just leave it and just say, at 16, you've got to begin to say it's your choice. And yet this is why we believe this way, and know that it's lodged in there. Ideally, you have other people supporting you around that young person. So what else would you say, Father Nick?
I think that's very important. I think having a village to assist that mom and having that conversation with someone that's, within the church that is well respected and loved. And I think that, again, going back to your earlier point, look, I have a teenage daughter, so I totally relate. I mean, when I go to the store, my jaw just drops because I'm looking to buy clothes for her with my wife, obviously. And I'm like going, are those shorts? So sadly, the world that we're living in right now is marketing so much to the way a girl should look, what she should dress, especially with young women, especially I think more so than they are with young men. And I think that, but I think for the mom that's emailing this question, and for parents in general, is, number one, I think what Ann is saying is totally true. Is look for someone within the parish that it can be a mentor, to be a guide to that person, kind of expand your parenting team, if you will. I think number two, again, like what Ann would mention at the very top of the show, is I would love for you to oftentimes share your testimony. Tell your daughter not what she's doing wrong so much, but what what you love, what the time that how God blessed you with her, or talk about your own walk of faith, what God, how you were maybe at her age, and what you were looking for, and what maybe some mistakes that you may have made, or decisions that you thought maybe looking back on now may have not been the best, and how that shaped you. Really not telling her what she's doing wrong, because I think most young people are very much aware of that. I think, especially if you've already said it to them. I think so I would switch as opposed to being about them, but really about you, about how God has been working in your life. And then I think it's so important though that, again, mentioning what Ann had mentioned earlier, and that is that taking the time to talk about Christ in the family, spending time in prayer, making sure that you're just you yourself are talking about what. As we mentioned earlier, what Christ means to you, but also in talking about what it means to be a Christian. Well, God gives us, God's not ambiguous. There's no I wonder what God wants me to be acting or wearing. I mean, he talks about us, that we are basically borrowing our bodies, that God has simply breathed his life, that without his breath in us, we're simply dust. So God gives us this body as, in many ways, on loan, and how we take care of it, how we steward it, as we use it, how we manage it, is really a reflection of our own walk of faith. So, how you present yourself on the outside oftentimes is really what you're feeling on the inside. And so I would try your best to kind of, in talking to your daughter, an added thing is to say, is maybe trying to get on what's kind of going on the inside, because a lot of times how we try to dress is sometimes an area in our life that we may be struggling with, wanting more, obviously the unhealthy attention, or wanting someone to like me because I don't really like myself. So I would kind of use those kind of ways and methods. I definitely, obviously don't know your daughter, but I would encourage you to speak to your parish priest about that and engage him in maybe even doing a talk with the youth about that. But I do think that that's something, those are some steps that I think just initially off the top of my head would be areas that I would say that we should go with. I also wanted to kind of share yet another email question that just came in, and it's a little bit for the younger children. The question is this: although my child is still very young, how can I begin to build the foundations for a classical Christian education? And that's the initial question. The second thing she follows us up with is homeschooling will most likely not be an option for my child, but I'm interested in after schooling. In other words, teaching the child after his or her normal school day. Unfortunately, I cannot find resources on how to apply a classical Christian education principles within an after-school setting. How can I still give my child a classic Christian education by teaching him or her after school at home? Are there any, are there programs or things that you know of that are really helpful for a mom who's trying to find some after-school programs to kind of guide their child in their walk of faith?
Yeah, that's great. Actually, one of my team members, Matushka Jenny Mosher, would be the best to advise on that. And I don't have the list off the top of my head, but I will say one little. There's a couple little nuggets. Two of our favorite family nuggets are Susan Wise Bauer's series, A Story of the World. I don't know if you've listened to that, but it's amazing series that just and it's history for the classical child, and you can get both 4-volume books and then they have audio, and we just love that series. The other staple is Focus on the Family's Narnia series. They do a radio theater, and those have also been on repeat in our car, and they're just stunning. The way they tell the Chronicles of Narnia. So a couple little things, but I will, if the mother wants to reach out to me directly at A Bezzerides, BEZZERIDES @hc.edu, I would be happy to do my work to have a good list on that. There are a lot of people I know who would be happy to chime in and are well networked in those areas.
And as in we've got about 12 minutes left in our show. I just wanted to kind of get back to some of the questions that I had for us for the show. I'd love to, if you were, if you could wave your magic wand, if you will, and to the church, what would be something that you would say, okay, people that are in the church, these are that may not have children or may have children, but they're listening to the show tonight and they're looking, okay, what do we as a church do? Or for that matter, clergy that are listening, what would you recommend? What would you love to see more of the church doing now during these days of when our adolescents are dealing with so much? What would be some practical ways that you would ask them to do that they can start applying, perhaps in the fall?
Yeah, that's great. The very first one I'll say, and people can do this now, we would love to welcome your children to Crossroads. When you have juniors or seniors, that you send us to them, and then we, because you've nurtured them, and we, God willing, send them back to you with a new mission to be more involved in your parish and to be servant leaders. And so, just keep that on your radar for all of you, for your families, for your parishes. We actually still have space in our brand new Crossroads San Francisco. It's going to be at a beautiful retreat center near Stanford University, and that's July 2 to 12. So, and actually we're as a pilot, we're accepting sophomores this year. So sophomores, juniors, and seniors. We do have space July 2 to 12 this year. As I think about it for parishes especially, and families and others, I think four things. And I think about this mostly with young adults, and we didn't talk too much about young adults, but we've learned a lot about them through our TELUS project. Really the whole 20s is different today than it was even a decade ago. It's lengthened. It showed delaying of timing of 5 traditional demographic markers of adulthood, leaving home, finishing school, getting married, having a child, and becoming financially independent. Those are all a lot later than they were, a year or several ago. So it changes the nature of young adulthood to one of really extended adolescence, and why we're so needed in the lives of young people, and why young adults, and why our parishes really could be an amazing home for young adults. Jim Burns has this wonderful line about transitioning from parenting youth to parenting young adults. He says, you're fired from your old job, but you're hired for a new one.
Can you say that one more time? And I love that.
Yeah. So when you transition from parenting youth to parenting young adults, you're fired from your old job, but you're hired for a new one.
Yeah, I love that.
Isn't that so good? Yeah.
Yes.
And so
I love that.
How do we think about that for our churches? And as we think about the young adults and the ones we've worked with, young adults are living a life of transience, isolation, and distraction. And if we can, in our parishes, wake up the village to do life with them, all the while energizing and respecting their leadership capacity, that would be just an amazing gift to young people. I think, if I sort of boiling it down to 4, telling our stories of faith, we said this, how faith and life relate for you. About thinking about, praying about the young adults, the young people. So all the way, youth and young adults, hanging out with them, inviting them for coffee, telling your stories, stopping to really have a conversation with them at coffee hour. Hearing what
I love that, because coffee hour ends up being so, I love coffee hour. I think it's a tremendous opportunity in ministry, especially if it's done in the right way, where it's not where people are all kind of hanging out with their people that they know, but they're also taking a moment to introduce themselves to new people that are visiting. But also, I love how you're saying that, to truly engage the children that are there, the young adults that are there, and just and connecting one-on-one with them. I think it's such a powerful really reminder for all of us.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine if we all flipped? I mean, I love going to church. I love checking in with my friends who I haven't seen and getting the quick update. And yet, switching it to how can I serve in coffee hour? How can I serve young people who are struggling and have stories that they want to tell, and alternate models of adulthood than their own parents are often so important,
And we're getting a question. We had a question that came through the comment line that's from our friends in Sydney, Australia, who tune into our show. They're simply asking, is there a Crossroads program or similar program in Sydney, Australia, that you're aware of?
Oh, unfortunately, no, but you invite us and maybe we'll come.
Okay, Demi. So Demi is sharing this comment. So thank you, Demi, for that, and see what we can do. Let's talk to our parish priest down under in Sydney, Australia, and see what we can do about trying to get Crossroads out in Sydney.
Yeah. We would love.
Yeah. So if someone is interested, they got a young an older teenager that's interested in going into Crossroads. What would you say are some things that in the last few months of our show, what would be things that you would be saying that if they do this is what they're going to benefit from? Maybe just kind of tell us what you share with people in general about the Crossroads program.
Oh, great. A lot of it depends on the thing that'll make that student tick. If they love AP courses, they're really sort of intellectually curious. Mm-hmm. They get to study with faculty. They have their minds blown. It's sort of, we joke, it's AP theology. It meets them where they're at, where all the other. If they're really socially inclined, it's like paideia for life. It's just feeling not like meeting other young Orthodox Christians so that you're not alone, and camps often do that. And yet camps, when they draw from a particular region, you'll find they can get kind of cliquey, or you'll find some kids aren't camp kids. Well, this Crossroad takes both camp kids and the kids who don't like camp at all, it's structured very differently. So, it's the big questions. If you have a teenager, who has big questions and they are asking for more, this is the kind of program where they get to ask those questions. If they just want to figure out what am I going to do with my life? Mm-hmm. We through a strengths finder, we take them through figuring out what their best signature themes are. How did God make you? And what are your strengths? And then if they love service, we actually meet homeless people, and we have long conversations with the elderly in nursing homes, and so there's a service component too. So, so I would say, know the child, know the young person you're talking to, and but I will say, our alumni, there's no question, 85% of young people who apply to Crossroad have heard it's a word of mouth thing that somebody says to them. And often it's an older sibling or a young adult who meets with them at church and just says, I went to this, you should apply. Parents also, reach out to other kids and say, younger kids when they know about it, and say, have you considered this? I think we underestimate if a parent approaches a kid, if it's not your kid, and says, I notice you, I notice something about you. Mm-hmm. We just had a young woman, I want to tell the story briefly, a young woman apply for our certificate in youth and young adult ministry at Holy Cross. And I also want to promote that. That's for, it's post-BA, undergraduate work, and it's a graduate certificate in youth and young adult ministry and leadership. And we just interviewed a young woman who loved the church, and she's trying to figure out what to do next. And the chanter of her church, who's a Crossroad dad, his daughter came to Crossroad, noticed her love for the church, and said, you ought to consider this. And she otherwise wouldn't have known about it. And everybody has the power to help young people figure out who they are by noticing them, by noticing what they're gifted at. And it is such a gift to young people, yeah. Provide hospitality was another thing I was just going to mention, having them over for dinner. You could change some lives just by, once a quarter, once a semester, having young people over to your home and welcoming them for dinner. I joke that I tend to be the Pied Piper because I think young people have figured out they might meet other interesting young people through me when they're up the and coupling time,
Well, and I think these are such like easy, low-hanging fruit that allows all of us to be part of that, be part of the plan to help to, as we've been talking about this, help to fight for our youth, to give them an opportunity to grow in Christ, grow in the church. And, can you give us, is there a website for the Crossroads program or somewhere where they can go if they have questions to inquire or just to email you directly?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's www.crossroad, singular, CROSSROAD, institute.org, crossroadinstitute.org. You're also welcome to reach out to me, Ann Bezzerides, at hchc.edu or at crossroadinstitute.org. So we would love to welcome your young people.
Dr. Ann Bezzerides, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're so, I think I could have talked to you for another hour on this topic. I mean, you're just such a wealth such a wealth of information. And I just encourage you as parents and really as you're listening to the show is, let it not just be, let it not just simply go through your ears, but let it go to your heart. Let it settle in your heart. And let's all work together. Let's all work together to find ways that we can all help our youth, not only as parents where we're sharing and speaking about our faith, but also living out our faith in front of our children, but also providing opportunities within our church. I think Ann spoke beautifully about low-hanging fruit of just inviting them, connecting to them, seeing them, speaking with them, mentoring them. There's all these different ways that we are called to do to take care of God's holy children. So please do that. And please give our love to your family and to your boys. We look forward to having you on future episodes of Live with the Louhs.
Father Nicholas, thank you. It has been a joy to be with you. God bless your ministry. You inspire me so much. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ann. And thank you to Matushka Trudy for producing our show. She does this every single week. And all the great people at Ancient Faith for all that you guys do. We love being part of the Ancient Faith family. And so if you're listening live, we just encourage you to stay on because today Live with Father Tom Soroka is right after this show. So stay on. And if you're, as we mentioned at the top of the show, if you're looking for some daily words of encouragement and inspiration, definitely go to our website at thelouhs.com. That's LOUHS. thelouhs.com. Click on the subscribe button and receive our daily words of encouragement. Next week, June 14th, is a show all for you. We're doing an Ask the Louhs question, opportunity for you to ask questions on any topic that you may have. We already shared this with our own community and had questions that people wanted to discuss already, but we invite all of you, email us a question or simply tune in next week. We look forward to having you with us. And so to all of you, my friends, God bless you and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelouhs.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Louhs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with the Louhs is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
Hi there, I'm Bobby Maddox, station manager of Ancient Faith Radio, and I would like to invite you to the 2022 Ancient Faith Content Creator Conference.